On the appointed day Sir Criston Cole placed the iron and ruby crown of Aegon the Conqueror upon the brow of the eldest son of King Viserys and Queen Alicent, proclaiming him Aegon of House Targaryen, second of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the realm. His mother, Queen Alicent, beloved of the smallfolk, placed her own crown upon the head of her daughter, Helaena, Aegon's wife and sister. After kissing her cheeks, the mother knelt before the daughter, bowed her head, and said, "My queen." How many came to see the crowning remains a matter of dispute. Grand Maester Munkin, drawing upon Orwyle, tells us that more than 100,000 smallfolk jammed into the dragon pit, their cheers so loud they shook the very walls, whilst Mushroom says the stone benches were half filled. With the High Septon in Aldtown, too old and frail to journey to King's Landing, it fell to Septon Eustace to anoint King Aegon's brow with holy oils, and bless him in the 7 names of God. A few of those in attendance, with sharper eyes than most, might have noticed that there were but 4 white cloaks in attendance on the new king, not 5 as heretofore. Aegon too had suffered his first defections the night before, when Sir Stephen Darklyn of the Kingsguard had slipped from the city with his squire, 2 stewards, and 4 guardsmen. Under the cover of darkness they made their way out a postern gate to where a fisherman's skiff awaited to take them to Dragonstone. They brought with them a stolen crown, a band of yellow gold ornamented with 7 gems of different colors. This was the crown King Viserys had worn, and the old King Jaehaerys before him. When Prince Aegon had decided to wear the iron and ruby crown of his namesake, the Conqueror, Queen Alicent had ordered Viserys's crown locked away, but the steward entrusted with the task had made off with it instead. After the coronation, the remaining Kingsguard escorted Aegon to his mount, a splendid creature with gleaming golden scales and pale pink wing membranes. Sunfire was the name given this dragon of the Golden Dawn. Munkin tells us the king flew thrice around the city before landing inside the walls of the Red Keep. Sir Eric Cargyle led his grace into the Torchlit throne room, where Aegon II mounted the steps of the Iron Throne before 1,000 lords and knights. Shouts rang through the hall. On Dragonstone, no cheers were heard. Instead, screams echoed through the halls and stairwells of Sea Dragon Tower, down from the queen's apartments where Rhaenyra Targaryen strained and shuddered in her 3rd day of labor. The child had not been due for another turn of the moon, but the tidings from King's Landing had driven the princess into a black fury, and her rage seemed to bring on the birth, as if the babe inside her were angry too, and fighting to get out. The princess shrieked curses all through her labor, calling down the wrath of the gods upon her half-brothers and their mother, the queen, and detailing the torments she would inflict upon them before she would let them die. She cursed the child inside her too, Mushroom tells us, clawing at her swollen belly as Maester Gerardis and her midwife tried to restrain her and shouting, "Monster! Monster! Get out! Get out! Get out!" When the babe at last came forth, she proved indeed a monster, a stillborn girl, twisted and malformed, with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby, scaled tail. Or so Mushroom describes her. The dwarf tells us that it was he who carried the little thing to the yard for burning. The dead girl had been named Visenya, Princess Rhaenyra announced the next day, when milk of the poppy had blunted the edge of her pain. She was my only daughter, and they killed her. They stole my crown and murdered my daughter, and they shall answer for it. And so the dance began, as the princess called a council of her own. The Black Council, the true telling names that gathering on Dragonstone, setting it against the Green Council of King's Landing. Rhaenyra herself presided, seated between her uncle and husband, Prince Daemon, and her trusted counselor, Maester Gerardis. Her 3 sons were present with them, though none had reached the age of manhood. Jace was 14, Luke 13, Joffrey 11. 2 Kingsguard stood with them, Sir Eric Cargyle, twin to Sir Eric, and the Westerman, Sir Laurent Marbrand. 30 knights, 100 crossbowmen, and 300 men-at-arms made up the rest of Dragonstone's garrison. That had always been deemed sufficient for a fortress of such strength. As an instrument of conquest, however, our army leaves something to be desired. Prince Daemon observed sourly. A dozen lesser lords, bannermen and vassals to Dragonstone, sat at the Black Council as well. Celtigar of Claw Isle, Staunton of Rook's Rest, Massey of Stoneadens, Bar Emmon of Sharp Point, and Darklyn of Duskendale amongst them. But the greatest lord to pledge his strength to the princess was Corlys Valerion of Driftmark. Though the sea snake had grown old, he liked to say that he was clinging to life, like a drowning sailor clinging to the wreckage of a sunken ship. Mayhaps the seven have preserved me for this one last fight. With Lord Corlys came his wife, Princess Rhaenys, 55, her face lean and lined, her black hair streaked with white, yet fierce and fearless as she had been at 22. The queen who never was, Mushroom calls her. What did Viserys ever have that she did not? A little sausage. Is that all it takes to be a king? Let Mushroom rule, then. My sausage is thrice the size of his. Those who sat at the Black Council counted themselves loyalists, but knew full well that King Aegon II would name them traitors. Each had already received a summons from King's Landing, demanding they present themselves at the Red Keep to swear oaths of loyalty to the new king. All their hosts combined could not match the power the Hightowers alone could field. Aegon's Greens enjoyed other advantages as well. Aldtown, King's Landing, and Lannisport were the largest and richest cities in the realm. All three were held by Greens. Every visible symbol of legitimacy belonged to Aegon. He sat the Iron Throne. He lived in the Red Keep. He wore the Conqueror's crown, wielded the Conqueror's sword, and had been anointed by a Septon of the Faith before the eyes of tens of thousands. Grand Maester Orwyle sat in his councils, and the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard had placed the crown upon his princely head. And he was male, which in the eyes of many made him the rightful king, his half-sister the usurper. Against all that, Rhaenyra's advantages were few. Some older lords might yet recall the oaths they had sworn when she was made Princess of Dragonstone and named her father's heir. There had been a time when she had been well loved by highborn and commons alike, when they had cheered her as the realm's delight. Many a young lord and noble knight had sought her favor then, though how many would still fight for her, now that she was a woman wed, her body aged and thickened by 6 childbirths, was a question none could answer. Though her half-brother had looted their father's treasury, the princess had at her disposal the wealth of House Valerion, and the sea snake's fleets gave her superiority at sea. And her consort, Prince Daemon, tried and tempered in the Stepstones, had more experience of warfare than all their foes combined. Last, but far from least, Rhaenyra had her dragons. As does Aegon, Maester Gerardis pointed out. We have more, said Princess Rhaenys, the queen who never was, who had been a dragonrider longer than all of them. And ours are larger and stronger, but for Vhagar. Dragons thrive best here on Dragonstone. She enumerated for the council. King Aegon had his Sunfire. A splendid beast, though young. Aemond One-Eye rode Vhagar, and the peril posed by Queen Visonya's mount could not be gainsaid. Queen Helaena's mount was Dreamfire, the she-dragon who had once borne the old king's sister Rhaena through the clouds. Prince Daeron's dragon was Tessarion, with her wings dark as cobalt and her claws and crest and belly scales as bright as beaten copper. That makes 4 dragons of fighting size, said Rhaenys. Queen Helaena's twins had their own dragons too, but no more than hatchlings. The usurper's youngest son, Maelor, was possessed only of an egg. Against that, Prince Daemon had Caraxes and Princess Rhaenyra Syrax, both huge and formidable beasts. Caraxes especially was fearsome, and no stranger to blood and fire after the Stepstones. Rhaenyra's 3 sons by Laenor Valerion were all dragonriders. Vermax, Arax, and Tyraxes were thriving, and growing larger every year. Aegon the Younger, eldest of Rhaenyra's 2 sons by Prince Daemon, commanded the young dragon Stormcloud, though he had yet to mount him. His little brother, Viserys, went everywhere with his egg. Rhaenys's own she-dragon, Meleys the Red Queen, had grown lazy, but remained fearsome when roused. Prince Daemon's twins by Laena Valerion might yet be dragonriders too. Baela's dragon, the slender pale green moondancer, would soon be large enough to bear the girl upon her back. And though her sister Rhaena's egg had hatched a broken thing that died within hours of emerging from the egg, Syrax had recently produced another clutch. One of her eggs had been given to Rhaena, and it was said that the girl slept with it every night, and prayed for a dragon to match her sister's. Moreover, 6 other dragons made their lairs in the smoky caverns of the Dragonmont above the castle. There was Silverwing, good Queen Alysanne's mount of old, Seasmoke, the pale grey beast that had been the pride and passion of Sir Laenor Valerion, hoary old Vermithor, unridden since the death of King Jaehaerys. And behind the mountain dwelled 3 wild dragons, never claimed nor ridden by any man, living or dead. The small folk had named them Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal. Find riders to master Silverwing, Vermithor, and Seasmoke, and we will have 9 dragons against Aegon's 4. Mount and fly their wild kin, and we will number 12, even without Stormcloud, Princess Rhaenys pointed out. That is how we shall win this war. Lords Celtigar and Staunton agreed. Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters had proved that knights and armies could not stand against fire and blood. Celtigar urged the princess to fly against King's Landing at once, and reduce the city to ash and bone. And how will that serve us, my lord? The sea snake demanded of him. We want to rule the city, not burn it to the ground. It will never come to that, Celtigar insisted. The usurper will have no choice but to oppose us with his own dragons. Our 9 must surely overwhelm his 4. At what cost? Princess Rhaenyra wondered. My sons would be riding 3 of those dragons, I remind you. And it would not be 9 against 4. I will not be strong enough to fly for some time yet. And who is to ride Silverwing, Vermithor, and Seasmoke? You, my lord. I hardly think so. It will be 5 against 4, and one of their 4 will be Vhagar. That is no advantage. Surprisingly, Prince Daemon agreed with his wife. In the Stepstones, my enemies learned to run and hide when they saw Caraxes's wings or heard his roar. But they had no dragons of their own. It is no easy thing for a man to be a dragonslayer. But dragons can kill dragons, and have. Any maester who has ever studied the history of Valyria can tell you that. I will not throw our dragons against the usurpers unless I have no other choice. There are other ways to use them, better ways. Then the prince laid his own strategies before the Black Council. Rhaenyra must have a coronation of her own, to answer Aegon's. Afterward they would send out ravens, calling on the lords of the 7 kingdoms to declare their allegiance to their true queen. We must fight this war with words before we go to battle, the prince declared. The lords of the great houses held the key to victory. Daemon insisted, their bannermen and vassals would follow where they led. Aegon the usurper had won the allegiance of the Lannisters of Castle Rock, and Lord Tyrell of Highgarden was a mewling boy in swaddling clothes whose mother, acting as his regent, would most like align the reach with her over-mighty bannermen, the Hightowers, but the rest of the realm's great lords had yet to declare. Storm's End will stand with us, Princess Rhaenys said. She herself was of that blood on her mother's side, and the late Lord Boromund had always been the staunchest of friends. Prince Daemon had good reason to hope that the Maid of the Valley might bring the Eyrie to their side as well. Aegon would surely seek the support of Pike, he judged. Only with the support of the Iron Islands could Aegon hope to surpass the strength of House Velaryon at sea. But the Ironmen were notoriously fickle, and Dalton Greyjoy loved blood and battle. He might easily be persuaded to support the princess. The north was too remote to be of much import in the fight, the council judged. By the time the Starks gathered their banners and marched south, the war might well be over. Which left only the Riverlords, a notoriously quarrelsome lot ruled over, in name at least, by House Tully of Riverrun. We have friends in the Riverlands, the prince said, though not all of them dare show their colors yet. We need a place where they can gather, a toehold on the mainland large enough to house a sizable host, and strong enough to hold against whatever forces the usurper can send against us. He showed the lords a map. Here. Harrenhal. And so it was decided. Prince Daemon would lead the assault on Harrenhal, riding Caraxes. Princess Rhaenyra would remain on Dragonstone until she had recovered her strength. The Velaryon fleet would close off the gullet, sallying forth from Dragonstone and Driftmark to block all shipping entering or leaving Blackwater Bay. We do not have the strength to take King's Landing by storm, Prince Daemon said, no more than our foes could hope to capture Dragonstone. But Aegon is a green boy, and green boys are easily provoked. Mayhaps we can goad him into a rash attack. The sea snake would command the fleet, whilst Princess Rhaenys flew overhead to keep their foes from attacking their ships with dragons. Meanwhile, ravens would go forth to Riverrun, the Eyrie, Pike, and Storm's End, to gain the allegiance of their lords. Then up spoke the queen's eldest son, Jacaerys. We should bear those messages, he said. Dragons will win the lords over quicker than ravens. His brother Lucerys agreed, insisting that he and Jace were men, or near enough to make no matter. Our uncle calls us Strongs, but when the lords see us on Dragonback they will know that for a lie. Only Targaryens ride dragons. Mushroom tells us that the sea snake grumbled at this, insisting that the 3 boys were Velaryons, yet he smiled as he said it, with pride in his voice. Even young Joffrey chimed in, offering to mount his own dragon, Tyraxes, and join his brothers. Princess Rhaenyra forbade that. Joff was but 11. But Jacaerys was 14, Lucerys 13, bold and handsome lads, skilled in arms, who had long served as squires. If you go as messengers, not as knights, she told them. You must take no part in any fighting. Not until both boys had sworn solemn oaths upon a copy of the seven-pointed star would her grace consent to using them as her envoys. It was decided that Jace, being the older of the two, would take the longer, more dangerous task, flying first to the Eyrie to treat with the Lady of the Vale, then to White Harbor to win over Lord Manderley, and lastly to Winterfell to meet with Lord Stark. Luke's mission would be shorter and safer. He was to fly to Storm's End, where it was expected that Boros Baratheon would give him a warm welcome. A hasty coronation was held the next day. The arrival of Sir Stephen Darkland, late of Aegon's Kingsguard, was an occasion of much joy on Dragonstone, especially when it was learned that he and his fellow loyalists turned cloaks, Sir Otto would name them, when offering a reward for their capture, had brought the stolen crown of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator. 300 sets of eyes looked on as Prince Daemon Targaryen placed the old king's crown on the head of his wife, proclaiming her Rhaenyra of House Targaryen, first of her name, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The prince claimed for himself the style protector of the realm, and Rhaenyra named her eldest son, Jaehaerys, the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. Her first act as queen was to declare Sir Otto Hightower and Queen Alicent traitors and rebels. As for my half-brothers and my sweet sister, Helaena, she announced, they have been led astray by the counsel of evil men. Let them come to Dragonstone, bend the knee, and ask my forgiveness, and I shall gladly spare their lives and take them back into my heart, for they are of my own blood, and no man or woman is as accursed as the kinslayer. Word of Rhaenyra's coronation reached the Red Keep the next day, to the great displeasure of Aegon II. My half-sister and my uncle are guilty of high treason, the young king declared. I want them attainted, I want them arrested, and I want them dead. Cooler heads on the Green Council wished to parley. The princess must be made to see that her cause is hopeless, Grand Maester Orwyle said. Brother should not war against sister. Send me to her, that we may talk and reach an amicable accord. Aegon would not hear of it. Septon Eustace tells us that his grace accused the Grand Maester of disloyalty and spoke of having him thrown into a black cell, with your black friends. But when the two queens his mother, Queen Alicent, and his wife, Queen Helaena spoke in favor of Orwyle's proposal, the truculent king gave way reluctantly. So Grand Maester Orwyle was dispatched across Blackwater Bay under a peace banner, leading a retinue that included Sir Eric Cargyle of the Kingsguard and Sir Gawain Hightower of the Gold Cloaks, along with a score of scribes and septons, amongst them Eustace. The terms offered by the king were generous, Monken declares in his True Telling. If the princess would acknowledge him as king and make obeisance before the Iron Throne, Aegon II would confirm her in her possession of Dragonstone, and allow the island and castle to pass to her son Jaehaerys upon her death. Her second son, Lucerys, would be recognized as the rightful heir to Driftmark, and the lands and holdings of House Valerion, her boys by Prince Daemon, Aegon the Younger and Viserys, would be given places of honor at court, the former as the king's squire, the latter as his cupbearer. Pardons would be granted to those lords and knights who had conspired treasonously with her against their true king. Rhaenyra heard these terms in stony silence, then asked Orwyle if he remembered her father, King Viserys. Of course, your grace, the maester answered. Perhaps you can tell us who he named as his heir and successor, the queen said, her crown upon her head. Your grace, Orwyle replied. And Rhaenyra nodded and said, with your own tongue you admit I am your lawful queen. Why then do you serve my half-brother, the pretender? Monken tells us that Orwyle gave a long and erudite reply, citing Andal law and the Great Council of 101. Mushroom claims he stammered and voided his bladder. Whichever is true, his answer did not satisfy Princess Rhaenyra. A Grand Maester should know the law and serve it, she told Orwyle. You are no Grand Maester, and you bring only shame and dishonor to that chain you wear. As Orwyle protested feebly, Rhaenyra's knights stripped his chain of office from his neck and forced him to his knees whilst the princess bestowed the chain upon her own man, Maester Gerardys, a true and leal servant of the realm and its laws. As she sent Orwyle and the other envoys on their way, Rhaenyra said, tell my half-brother that I will have my throne, or I will have his head. Long after the dance was done, the singer Lucan of Tarth would compose a sad ballad called, Farewell, My Brother, still sung today. The song purports to relate the last meeting between Sir Eric Cargyle and his twin, Sir Eric, as Orwyle's party was boarding the ship that would carry them back to King's Landing. Sir Eric had sworn his sword to Aegon, Sir Eric to Rhaenyra. In the song, each brother tries to persuade the other to change sides. Failing, they exchange declarations of love and part, knowing that when next they meet it will be as enemies. It is possible that such a farewell did indeed take place that day on Dragonstone, however, none of our sources make mention of such. Aegon II was 22, quick to anger and slow to forgive. Rhaenyra's refusal to accept his rule enraged him. I offered her an honorable peace, and the whore spat in my face, he declared. What happens next is on her own head. What happened next was war.